that the court, I've said this since literally day one when President Trump announced Liberation Day. I said that day, this is illegal. The Supreme Court is going to strike this down. He does not actually have the constitutional authority to do this.
I think it's also going to be very disruptive to the economy as we get through this. I mean, let's just say, I mean, but it has been. But I'm just saying, let's
it'll be the best thing for the economy.
Well,
it'll be great.
That's what he says.
No. If tariffs are struck down.
But I'm saying functionally, we have a question that we have to ask ourselves, which is what do we do with the tariffs that have been collected? Right. What do we do with the funds that have been collected?
By the way, some of them have been spent already. They're already
those are illegitimate, illegal funds that we have now collected. I mean, I'm not sure how that works.
In today's video, Bakari Sellers destroys Ben Shapiro on Newsnight with Abby Phillip. What started as a debate about Trump's economic policies quickly turned into a masterclass in constitutional law when Bakari pressed Shapiro on the legality of Trump's tariffs. As the Supreme Court questions whether the president can use emergency powers to bypass Congress, Bakari exposes how these tariffs aren't just bad economics. They're a violation of the separation of powers. Even Shapiro struggled to defend it when the facts came out. So let's dive in and watch how Bakari Sellers shuts down Ben Shapiro on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
There are very pointed questions, but we can just start with Chief Justice Roberts. Why not? He's the Chief Justice. As he mentioned, generally, the Congress has the power to tax, and that's a power that's reserved only for them. Trump's lawyers or the administration lawyers are saying that this isn't a tax. What they're doing is essentially regulating imports. This is more about foreign policy, and what they're doing is trying to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. So they're regulating import to allow that to happen, and that any taxes that comes from that is incidental. The lawyers on the other side are saying that's BS. This is a tax, and only the Congress has the right to do that. Now, it is of note that Justice Alito did bring up that in emergency situations, the president does have more power. And we're going to hear this question answered of, Trump has this notion now that he can decide when it's an emergency. And he's tried to use that with immigration. He's tried to use that with tariffs. I think we're going to get an answer as to whether or not a president can unilaterally decide when it's an emergency, so he should get more power.
Ben, the president has won something like more than 20 cases that have come up to the Supreme Court. Do you see this as a time, after sort of hearing some of the questions that are being asked, where the idea of more presidential power for this president in this case won't fly?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the characterizations of the court that I always find suspect is when people say, even the conservatives on the court are saying this. Okay, the conservatives on the court tend to be textualists, which means that they're actually looking at the text of the Constitution as opposed to sort of a vague peripheral understanding of what the Constitution means. And so when you're looking at the textualists, and they are saying the president does not actually have emergency authority to simply impose tariffs on the basis of trade deficits, which is essentially what he's been doing, that is a very conservative position. I've been critical of the president, very critical of the president on his tariff policies themselves, which I think are actually economically wrong and I think are actually damaging to the country in a lot of ways on foreign policy, actually. But that's not what's at issue. The issue here is whether the president has the emergency authority to do this sort of stuff. And I thought that the best question that was asked came from Justice Gorsuch, in which he actually said to the lawyers for the president, if, let's say, the next president decides that on the basis of emergency authority, that climate change is an emergency, and therefore he's going to slap, or she is going to slap a 50% tariff on all automobiles coming into the country, would that president have the authority to do this? And the attorney for the president, President Trump, said yes, they would have the authority to do this. I do not believe that the court, I've said this since literally day one when President Trump announced Liberation Day. I said that day, this is illegal. The Supreme Court is going to strike this down. He does not actually have the constitutional authority to do this.
I think it's also going to be very disruptive to the economy as we get through this. I mean, let's just say, I mean, but it has been. But I'm just saying,
it'll be the best thing for the economy.
Well,
it'll be great.
That's what he says.
No. If tariffs are struck down.
But I'm saying functionally, we have a question that we have to ask ourselves, which is what do we do with the tariffs that have been collected? Right. What do we do with the funds that have been collected?
By the way, some of them have been spent already. They're already
those are illegitimate, illegal funds that we have now collected. I mean, I'm not sure how that works.
Dante Mills, Bakari Sellers, and Ben Shapiro dives deep into one of the biggest constitutional questions of our time, how far a president's emergency powers can really go. And honestly, Dante and Bakari are on the right side of this argument. The Constitution is very clear. Congress, not the president, has the power to tax and impose tariffs. Article 1, Section 8 isn't vague about that. What Trump tried to do by labeling tariffs as regulatory measures instead of taxes is classic executive overreach, dressed up as economic nationalism. History actually backs Dante and Bakari's position. The Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled against presidents who attempt to stretch emergency powers beyond their intended limits, from Truman's steel seizure case in 1952 to more recent rulings curbing executive authority on immigration and spending. The idea that a president can simply declare an emergency and sidestep Congress sets a dangerous precedent. If Trump can do it for trade, what's to stop a future president from doing it for climate change or healthcare? Justice Gorsuch was right to raise that hypothetical because it exposes the slippery slope. Economically, Trump's tariffs were already hurting Americans before this legal fight even reached the court. Studies from the Federal Reserve and Peterson Institute for International Economics found that his tariffs raised consumer costs, hurt farmers, and failed to revive U.S. manufacturing as promised. Dante and Bakari understand that this isn't just about trade, it's about constitutional checks and balances. Letting any president redefine emergency to expand their own power undermines the very structure of American democracy.
But I don't think the Supreme Court should be concerned about that. That's a political issue. I think
that's
legally the court has to decide if there's legislation that gives the authority to the president. If it is, he can do it. If not, they can't look at the consequences of it or what the outcome is. They have to decide, is that power baked in? Yes or no.
But the consequences will still be there. And I'm just saying that if we have a government right now that is highly inefficient, that is not working, that is going to be a political question that somebody is going to have to be a grown-up in the room and have to answer to figure that out.
One of the things that will be fascinating is if the court does strike it down, watch the stock market absolutely explode. Seriously, you'll watch the S&P 500 jump like nobody's business, and the president is then going to be in the awkward position of having to explain why the markets are boosted by the rejection of his key policies.
The best example of that is going to be our American automakers. I mean, you're going to see their stock just explode. You're going to see those people who are doing that type of work, for example, who are building cars from Canada, the United States, and Mexico working together, their stock, to your point, their stock's going to go through the roof.
Well, let me let everybody hear what we heard from Justice Amy Coney Barrett on this issue of if they decide that this is not legal for the president to impose these tariffs, what happens next? Here's what she said.
If you win, tell me how the reimbursement process would work. Would it be a complete mess?
It's a very complicated thing. There's got to be an administrative protest. There was a harbor management case earlier that this court was involved with in the United States Shoe, in which, the refund process took a long time. There were any number of claims and equitable relief.
So a mess.
So it's difficult,
Okay.
Absolutely. We don't deny that it's difficult.
Is there a possibility, this is to you or anyone at this table, is there a possibility that the court looks at this and says, we don't want this mess, so we're just going to rule a certain way?
No.
Or will they
I
really
can't imagine that happens, and I really hope it doesn't happen, because I think setting a precedent like this is actually dangerous. We're supposed to have co-equal branches of government. Obviously, Congress throughout the years has ceded a lot of power to the executive branch, but using emergency powers to essentially make policy in the executive branch is wrong.
This part really highlights how fragile the balance of power between Congress and the presidency has become, and Dante Mills and Bakari Sellers are absolutely right to be alarmed by it. What's at stake here isn't just tariffs or trade, it's whether presidents can keep stretching emergency powers until Congress becomes little more than a bystander. Historically, that's never ended well. When presidents have bypassed Congress under the banner of emergency action, it's led to executive overreach and chaos. Just look back at Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1933 emergency banking powers or Truman's attempt to seize the steel industry in 1952, which the Supreme Court firmly struck down for the same reason being debated here. There are limits to presidential authority. Ben Shapiro talks about how the courts shouldn't concern themselves with political consequences, but that's a bit of a dodge. The courts exist to uphold the Constitution, not to protect presidents from the fallout of their own illegal actions. If Trump's tariffs were collected without lawful authority, those funds are indeed illegitimate, and pretending it's just a political issue ignores the very real damage done to consumers and businesses. And Bakari's point about the markets reacting positively to a strike down makes total sense. When Trump's tariff policies were in full swing, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and American Farm Bureau warned of long-term instability. Economists estimated that American households were paying hundreds more per year due to tariff-related price hikes. Ending these tariffs wouldn't just be a political win, it would be an economic relief. Dante and Bakari's stance isn't just ideological, it's grounded in economic data and constitutional integrity.
And so, and on top of that, I understand that it is going to be a mess. I mean, think about the farmers. The farmers have been hurt quite a bit as a result of these tariffs, and it's going to cause long-term damage to these farmers. But in the meantime, the Trump administration has decided to use some of the revenue from these tariffs to help make these farmers whole. So to your point, yes, a lot of that money has already been spent already. I don't know how the refunds are going to work. I don't really care.
But
what I care more about
one
is
of the points that was made by a justice is, if this power is given, how do we get it back?
Right.
You can't get it back. So they're not going to give this power because it's difficult to figure out. Because once it's out there, there's no president that's going to relinquish that power.
It's almost as if bad and intrusive government policy that affects huge numbers of people turns into a mess, actually, as just a general rule.
Have you advised Trump on any of this?
I've been saying this clearly and openly since before liberation.
He's not listening.
Interestingly, it's a fascinating conversation about the expansion of the administrative state, which we talked about kind of on a microcosm level here in New York City when it comes to affordability.
It's always back to Mondani.
No, not necessarily, but there is an appropriate conversation for us to be having about affordability.
It's a Birkenstock stamping on the human face forever.
Of course, there's a lot of experts going back and forth on whether tariffs are the right answer for this, but I do think it's important that we are seeing executive leadership on this when it comes to making America whole and making sure that we are not being taken advantage of on the global scale. That is important. So I'm hopeful that that conversation continues beyond this particular case. I know the Trump administration is very, very passionate about this. And frankly, heck, from a fiscal conservative perspective, if tariffs could replace, I don't know, the federal income tax someday, I would be cheering for that from the rooftops.
Good.
When I was in the legislature, an old state legislator once told me, we were having a discussion about fees and taxes, and he said they're both three-letter words that take money out of your pocket. I mean, you can add tariff to that as well, because tariff is simply just a tax.
But there's other ways to regulate imports, and I think that was part of the conversation today.
Section 202 authority.
If that's what you want to do, President, you have the right to do that without imposing a tax.
Correct.
And the tariff here is a tax.
Ana Kasparian and Dante Mills are on the right side of this issue. They're focused on constitutional boundaries and real-world economic consequences, not just political talking points. Isabel Brown tries to defend the idea of executive leadership as strength, but that completely misses the danger here. History shows that once a president gains unchecked power under the banner of emergency authority, it rarely goes away. We saw it with the Patriot Act, which was supposed to be temporary but ended up expanding government surveillance for decades. The same logic applies here. If the court upholds Trump's claim, future presidents could use that same power for anything from climate policy to domestic trade manipulation. And the idea that tariffs could replace income taxes, as Isabel casually suggests, is just economically unrealistic. Studies from the Tax Foundation and Brookings Institution have shown that tariffs function as regressive taxes. They hit low and middle income Americans hardest because they raise the prices of everyday goods. During Trump's trade war with China, the Federal Reserve estimated that American consumers bore nearly 100% of the tariff costs, not foreign producers. That's not fiscal conservatism. That's just bad economics disguised as nationalism. Ana and Dante are right to point out that these so-called emergency tariffs hurt farmers, manufacturers, and working-class families far more than they help. Even Trump's own bailout payments to farmers were a band-aid over self-inflicted wounds. The Constitution gives Congress the power to tax for a reason. It's about accountability. Once the executive branch starts writing its own tax code under the guise of emergencies, democracy takes a backseat to authoritarian convenience. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.